agency realized that there was no garment manufacturing in Des Moines and no agriculture in New York, so we needed to expand the range of industries. So luckily for you all, you got on the list. Specific to guard service enforcement, since 2001, there's been about 700 investigations every year in the guard services industry. Out of 30,000, that's not really a huge percentage, but it's significant enough that you need to be aware of it. In 77% of all the cases, there was some monetary finding. There was a finding that the guard company owed money to the employees. And there are this year several district offices with initiatives in the guard services industry. As far as what's going to happen, the fiscal year for the federal government will end September 30th. They are currently in the planning for FY 2010. They're probably having a huge meeting in the next couple of weeks on exactly what priorities are going to be given in each district office. The national priorities are set. The national priorities are undoubtedly in the low-wage industries, and so I suspect that there's not going to be a deviation from low-wage industries, from a focus on that group of 9. Typical, or I guess recent cases, somewhat recent cases, in guard service enforcement. So you've got a case out of Michigan where someone paid straight time for overtime, and in a couple of slides I'll get to exactly what the big issues are generally and then specific to guard services. $57,000 for straight time for overtime in Texas, and that's the 3rd time that company was investigated as their 3rd violation for that issue. So, I'm not sure who's doing what there, but yes. I'll explain exactly. Straight time for overtime is sort of the provision in the wage and hour division reporting system that captures a bunch of different issues. Straight time for overtime can include any time that someone, it's not really working off the clock, but you don't account fully for the time someone works in a work week. The portal-to-portal act stuff, taking out meal breaks, that sort of thing increases the number of hours worked, so the employee has effectively triggered the overtime provisions, but because the employer hasn't calculated the hours to go up over 40, they've only been paid straight time for all of the hours that they've worked. So it's not simply you don't pay straight time, you just, although there are violations where a company just doesn't pay time and a half after 40, typically speaking, the straight time for overtime cases are cases where someone has failed to account for all of the hours worked, and as a result, it's triggered the overtime provisions. Yes? I honestly don't know the answer to that. It depends on the system. I don't know exactly what the percentage is. I suspect that it's pretty high, but I have seen some payroll systems in other industries where there are variables that you can play with that might result in certain violations. Like I've done a payroll review for a grocery company where it rounded appropriately. It did all of the rounding the right way, except if it rounded a break of 15 minutes, and I can't remember exactly what the numbers were, I just remember it would round down on one side, up on the other, and a break of 15 minutes would become a break of 30 minutes, and then the parameters for the system would say, okay, that 30-minute break can come out because it's a significant enough break, but it was really only a 15-minute break. There are those types of violations in those systems, but I suspect that most of these violations come in organizations that don't have automated systems or are doing things that can't be captured by the automated system, like failing to account for certain donning and doffing time, or a system that takes out the lunch period, but the employer doesn't give someone the lunch period. I mean, those are things that it's not the fault of the system, it's the fault of the employer. I don't know. And then the thing that when there are repeat violations or willful violations, the Wage and Hour Division has what are called civil money penalties. So in that case in Texas, it was $80,000 in overtime damages, but $193,000 in civil money penalties. There are a lot of violations, and there's an entire matrix that the division uses to figure out exactly what penalty someone will get based on whether it's repeat, willful, repeat and willful, and that sort of thing. So there are just a couple more examples, and I'll just jump right into the substantive. Yes. No, no. I have to remember because there are different rules for different statutes. They didn't want to make civil money penalties sort of a bounty for the agency for child labor. So I think the child labor civil money penalties go to the General Treasury. The Fair Labor Standards Act civil money penalties go to the Wage and Hour Division. So every time there's a civil money penalty, the budget of the Wage and Hour Division goes up. I don't believe that the agency operates that way for a number of reasons, or I don't believe that from 2001 to 2000 and early 2009 the agency operated that way. I'll talk to you a little bit about what I think is going to happen in the next couple of years at the agency, just based on the people who have been nominated to fill various positions. But the agency did not operate in a way where we were going out and saying, okay, you know, we're going to have a budget shortfall in this office. Why don't we hit this employer with civil money penalties? For a variety of reasons, not the least of which is, as I'm sure you can, if you get hit with a lot of civil money penalties, the employer is more likely to contest the case and go to litigation, and it takes a lot longer to get everything resolved, and it takes a lot more energy and effort by the agency to do it, and you probably never recoup what you would get in civil money penalties even if you go to litigation, to trial. All right, your typical violations. And this is in the guard industry, and generally speaking, the #1 violation in the Wage and Hour that the Wage and Hour Division finds is straight time for overtime hours. And again, that is donning and doffing issues. That is travel time issues. That are various break period issues. That's all incorporated in this straight time for overtime hours concept. Obviously, it's a very broad category of violations, but that is the largest number of violations, not the largest monetary value necessarily, but the largest number of violations. Is everyone familiar with the donning and doffing issues, familiar with travel time issues, see where it's going? I mean, to the extent employees have cell phones and Blackberries and those types of devices, there's this huge wave coming on that type of litigation based on the travel time issues. Right now, does anybody have that type of setup where everybody has cell phones, guards have cell phones, guards have Blackberries that they're using to communicate, anything like that? No? Any hourly employees with Blackberries? All right. Generally speaking, travel time from home to work is not compensable. But there is a concept called the continuous workday, and this comes up in all these donning and doffing cases, where once the clock starts, once an employee has engaged in what's called the first principal activity of the day, all of the time after that is compensable. So there are cases out there where on these donning and doffing issues, the employees put on their specialized equipment and then walk 5 to 10 minutes to a post.